Welcome to Discovering Creativity. It's a pleasure to be with all of you again. And we have two special people here, and they are going to have a conversation about applied creativity in building a family, applied to the family relationships, parenting, etc. And so this is a joint project with the Instituto San Miguelense, American Creativity Association, and the and Texas A&M University, where I teach. So I'm going to leave it to both of you and enjoy. See you later.
Thank you. Okay, so first off, thanks for meeting me. I've never done anything like this before, so it is truly interesting. So he sent me your LinkedIn, so I kind of looked you up a little bit, and first and foremost, just completely in all of your work, especially the TED Talk. I mean, I was originally assigned to someone else, and then I can't explain how grateful I am to have been rematched with you. Like I said, watch your TED Talk. I am currently a mother of a 3-year-old, almost 4, and my daughter just turned 9 months old today. So watching that, I was like, just to see someone of your success have gone through postpartum depression and then having to take care of 2 kids at such a young age. I mean, it was just mind-blowing. And like I said, so grateful to meet you. So I'm trying to gather how I want to start the questions. I guess let's start. So I read the article, When Schools Get Creative. What encouraged you to go from your background in accounting to getting a master's in creative studies?
So the story is partly referenced in the TED Talk, which was the pathway was parenting, and not in the traditional sense. I really struggled as a parent. I had 2 children back to back. They were less than a year and a half apart. And for the most part, it was as if I was a single mother because my husband was in medical residency and working an insane number of hours. And so while he would have loved to help, he was not around, and we had no family for support. And also, we learn our parenting behaviors from what was modeled for us. But what was modeled for us isn't applicable in the context in which we find ourselves today. So I was raised in the Middle East. I was raised by South Asian parents. I was raised in a community that was largely of the same value set as my parents. So they didn't have to work as hard at raising me because I was being imbibed with all of the cultural values, and the approaches were the same for everybody. So you weren't exceptional, right? You didn't stand out. It was like the entire village was raising you, and everyone was happy with that. In the United States, that's different. We're a melting pot. We bring different cultures. We bring different values. We're immigrants. So there was a lot happening, which was creating an absence of a support structure, an absence of a roadmap. And I found myself struggling a great deal. And what happened was, as you mentioned, I struggled a lot with postpartum depression as well. And I went into therapy and was treated for that. But here's the thing, you can get treated for those things, but the everyday challenges of raising 2 toddlers doesn't go away. Therapy doesn't help with that. You still have to deal with that every single day. And what I realized was that I simply could not continue to do what I had always done and expect different results, right? The basic premise for a need for creativity. And so one night I found myself lying in bed thinking about the next day and already dreading it, because I knew that, first thing in the morning, my younger child would be throwing a tantrum because she didn't want to go to preschool. And then we would have a showdown, and that would then send the day escalating downhill rapidly from there. So I was thinking, how can I stop that from happening? What can I do about that? And my mind was racing. And I finally realized that one thing I could do is organize my thinking. And so I got out of bed and I went and found a notebook, just an ordinary composition notebook. And I started making notes about, okay, what's the challenge here, right? What is the problem that I'm trying to solve? And I was making lists of problems that I was working on. And I said, which is the problem that really sucks the energy out of my day? Which is the problem I most need to address right now?
Mm-hmm.
And it was that first tantrum of the day had to be averted because that got everybody off to the wrong start.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, all right, that's the problem to solve. And I wrote it at the top of another page in my notebook. And then I said, now what? And I sat there and I said to myself, well, let me make a list of all the things I've tried. Right. And I started making the list and it wasn't very long because I was doing the same thing every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I kept thinking, somehow magically today will be the day
Yep.
strategy will work. And I realized, well, that's pretty dumb. I mean, there's a reasonable way to think about this, which is that if this isn't working, let's find a different way. And so then I started making a list of other things I could do. Right? And then just because I was finally finding myself energized by this activity, I thought to myself, well, why don't I make a list of the things I should never do? And in one of those things, there was this idea that I just give in, that I let her stay home.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, well, that's an idea that maybe, I don't know why, that's the idea that appeals to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought to myself, what if I let her stay home and made her really unhappy with that decision? And so then that became, my daughter always says my mom is equal parts creative and evil. And this is the evil piece that I thought, okay, so I had this great idea that I'll let her stay home. And then the next morning, I faced the tantrum, and guess what? In the moment, I got emotionally hijacked. And once again, I completely forgot about my great idea from the night before. I was mad at myself at the end of the day that once again, it's not you forgot. So that night, I got out of bed and I wrote my idea on a Post-it note and I snuck it into the kitchen drawer. And I said, in the morning, the first thing I see will be that idea because I'll have to open the kitchen drawer to prepare breakfast. And sure enough, the next morning, I actually tried it. And it was incredible, Kristen, because on that day, my daughter thought she was first of all, she was stunned that I let her stay home. And then what was really disappointing for her was to discover that actually staying home was no fun because she was expected to help with laundry. She had to go with me to the grocery store. She had to help put away the groceries. She had to help prepare all the meals. And by the time her sister came home from school, full of news of all the fun things she had done at school, all that Hannah could talk about was all the work that she had done. And the next morning, she begged to go back to school. And never face that challenge again, right? So it really was a turning point. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that was working for me, I started to use that for all the other challenges that I faced. And I'll never forget this. A year from the day when my husband had told me I needed to get help or get out because he was really concerned about the safety of the kids because the postpartum depression and all the struggles had really turned into a parent nobody wants raising their children. A year later, I was at a dinner party and found myself surrounded by moms asking me for parenting advice. Right? And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, what is happening here? How did I go from this person who couldn't be trusted to be safe around her children to the person that everyone is asking for advice? Something has shifted in this time, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that there was something that was happening, which was working for me and could potentially work for other parents. Mm-hmm. And I didn't discover what that thing was. I mean, I had that deep curiosity about it, but I didn't discover what that thing was until I met someone else who was a facilitator for creative thinking. And she invited me to participate in a workshop that she was doing. And the minute I saw her laying out the creative process and starting to use the tools for creative thinking, I thought, oh my gosh, there's the method to my madness. I have to learn that because that's what every parent needs to know.
Mhm.
They need to know how to think in this way because this is the thing that those mothers needed. They don't need me to be solving their specific problems. So I don't need to feed them the fish. I need to teach them how to go fishing for themselves and how to create those opportunities for themselves. And so that's why I ended up studying creativity. Very long story.
No, I mean, so when I had my firstborn, my husband and I were still staying with our parents. So huge blessing. Even this second time around, we've had such a big help from both sides of the family, which I definitely appreciate. But when it comes to parenting, I mean, we're with our children the most. We know their triggers and we know just overall how they think. So when it comes to, we just had a family vacation in July. So when it comes to being under the same roof with 3 different parenting styles, a 3-year-old who, I mean, sharing is, I'm not too crazy about the sharing aspect just because I don't know. I mean, me and my boss were talking about it earlier, how if someone has like their own personal property, like say we're working on our laptops or something, and somebody's like, oh, can I share that? And you're just like, but I'm working right now. So I feel like having to instill that in kids it's a very touchy subject. And so we got into an issue where my 3-year-old was, I mean, he has a sister, but I mean, right now it's still like that only child syndrome where she's so little, they're not really playing with the same things right now. So he doesn't have to share as much. And my nephew was there with us too. He's just now turning 2 later this month. And of course, they're both boys. They both want the same cars. And so there is an issue with the sharing. And then I hear my sister-in-law like trying to parent him in her own way, which wasn't very nice. There was yelling involved. And I'm like, how can we get around this? Like I said, love the support and everything, but under the same roof with multiple different teachings going on, it's definitely, it's interesting. That was an interesting 5 days.
I can completely relate. And you've touched on so many parenting challenges in that one story. I mean, one of the things that you talked about there was related to polarities, right? Care for self and care for others. So when you're teaching your child that sharing is caring, sharing isn't always caring, because are you caring for the other person or are you caring for yourself in that moment, right? What is the context? So there is a time when sharing is appropriate and there's a time when it's not. So teaching your child the difference, how to create boundaries that also serve them, that also stem from self-compassion rather than an overemphasis on being accepted and being liked and being, society, fitting into society in a way that you are giving up your needs in order to do that. So there's so much there. And then, of course, different parents, different values, and we are all, and that's the other reason why I got into the parenting work and why the framework that I have created for parenting, the model that I've got, really allows people to craft an approach that works for them rather than a one-size-fits-all. So I don't tell people how to parent. I just get them to think about how they're going to parent in a productive and creative way. And that provides people with different answers. So your needs would be met because you have different expectations. You define success
Mhm.
differently from the way your sister-in-law defines success.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think a lot of it is me and my husband were raised both different. I come from a Hispanic household where you're pretty I wouldn't say punished. That's such a bad word. But at least in my mom, because I my mom was a single mother, didn't really have any connection with my dad. So that was a very difficult time for her. And I mean, having to bring in income and then raise a child on your own and very stressful. So when you come, and she worked in childcare, which she got me into childcare. I've been in childcare for 10 years, just recently made a change to investment banking, completely different. But coming from 8 hours a day, working with 10 to 15 different kids that aren't your own, and then coming home to your own, she's already so emotionally charged by the time she gets home to where if I were to ask like a simple question, it was met with like, I don't have time for this. I don't like, don't bother me type thing. So, I
Burnt out.
mean, parenting now is just trying to break the generational parenting that has been going on. So, me and my
Exactly.
husband are very much trying to get into like the creative aspect of things and just, trying to break what has been normalized for us.
Yeah.
Um, and our son hasn't officially been diagnosed, but we both have severe ADHD and we can see it in him. So
Mhm.
already that spectrum, we have to kind of figure out how to do things and navigate things differently than what we initially expected when we found out we were having a child.
Yeah.
So I guess my next question is, how did you encourage creative thinking with your children during like everyday activities at home?
So here's the thing, that everyday activities are great for teaching specific things, but actually, I think the biggest thing about creativity, which I argue for, is that it's not a button that you press and switch on.
Hmm.
Creativity really needs to be something that you are all the time, every day. It's about a mindset, it's about an approach to life that you need to model for your kids all the time. Things like, the ability to defer judgment, the ability to be curious, the ability to be flexible in your thinking and your approaches, right? You need to model that for your children all the time. And then there's specific instances where you can double down on that and you can speak to, ooh, let's get curious. You asked a great question there,
Hmm.
right? And you know what makes it great? I don't have an answer. Or what makes it great is that it might have more than one right answer.
Hmm.
Let's play together. Let's figure this out together. Right. So let's make a list of all the possible right answers. Or let's go learn about this thing that you've just demonstrated curiosity about. When I was growing up, my dad used to reward me for asking questions that made us crack open the Encyclopedia Britannica. Right. So I'm dating myself here. I was a child when dinosaurs roamed the earth. But if we had to open the Encyclopedia Britannica to discover an answer, because my dad didn't have it off the tip of his tongue, then that was a good day, because it gave him an opportunity to learn as much as it gave me an opportunity to learn. And so my dad was demonstrating, the value of curiosity and the value of learning, being a learner. And so I really think that if we can do that every day, not just in specific activities, but in everything that we do, we will transmit and transfer the creative mindset to our children.
Hmm.
So those are three skills. I mean, those are just the first three, I would say: being curious, the being open, and being flexible, right? And then you have things like being playful and being mindful and being hopeful. So, this idea that, oh, we find ourselves not with a problem, but with a challenge. So, really embracing this idea that life is full of challenges and opportunities, not problems and privilege.
Mm-hmm.
So really starting to frame everything that way, taking that problem and immediately turning it into a how might I, or how might you, or how might we question,
Mm-hmm.
starts to rewire your child's brain to see every problem as an opportunity to find a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not a specific activity, but the specific activity you can add to that is then say, "Ooh, would you like to work on that? We can work on that together." And then you start making a list of options together.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So now you've got the specific activity and this kind of role modeling that you actually goes much further than even the specific activities.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. So my son, he's starting soccer next month.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like I'm raising my husband too. Because, like I said, we come from two different backgrounds. And he was one where his parents have really pushed like good grades and you have to go to college, you have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't get tested for his ADHD until he was well into his adulthood. So it's kind of like punishing someone for not knowing how to focus. And that's where his parenting style kind of comes from. And he's very adamant on, like, if there's something my son's learning, okay, well, this is how we do it. I'm like, he's 3. You have to and like I said, I've been in childcare for the last 10 years and just trying to get him on board with, okay, we can't be so this is how we do it, because when he's wrong or he thinks he doesn't do something wrong, he's 3. He gets really upset with himself, even at 3. Like potty training was a whole nother thing. And if he had an accident, it was tears. Like, I didn't go to the potty on time. I didn't do it. And we're like,
yeah,
we need to rework how we're doing things. And so we're starting to get him into soccer next month. And my husband was like, okay, well, you have to do this drill. You have to make it over here. And Presley just wants to play with the ball. Like, I was in soccer, my husband was in soccer. And for me, you have to make the child enjoy the object first and then teach the rules later on. Like, this is just for fun. And in all honesty, this is just so we can call ourselves soccer mom and soccer dad. Like, Presley could care less about soccer, but it's just to get him some exercise once a week for the next 2 months. So yeah, just trying to like rewire my husband's brain so that we can focus on the children too.
Well, here's the thing. So, you know how when we go to a restaurant, we rarely go to restaurants where there's only one item on the menu, right? We like options, and there we like to exercise our options and choices in terms of, oh, this is what I prefer and that's what I prefer. Having the privilege of having 2 parents, or more than 2 parents even, right there, because we have wonderful diversity in types of families now, gives the child options. There's something that's going to work for them, and they're going to lean into that and respond to that. So just because you and your husband have different approaches, it doesn't mean that you have to discover one that is the right approach. As long as the 2 of you both come with positive intent and are sensitive to the impact that you're having. So if your husband remains sensitive to the fact that, hey, this is not working for him, so I should try something different, he can start as a starting point. He can start wherever he wants, because obviously he wants the same thing you want, which is to set your son up for success, right? You're giving your son 2 different options. You're giving him 2 different pathways to success. And if you notice that actually he's more responsive to your husband's strategies, then you can lean into those because you know you're sensitive to the impact that it's having. But if your husband notices that perhaps his strategies aren't working as well as yours, then he should be open to leaning into yours. But you should both have the freedom to try your own strategy, right? And there were many times when my husband and I have very different parenting approaches, and we have 2 children with very different preferences in terms of how they want to be parented. My younger child, when she was 4 years old, one night is lying in bed and cuddled up with me, and she just says, I'm so glad that you're my mom and that Baba isn't my mom. And I said, what do you mean by that? And she says, I'm so glad that I have you as my mother and that Baba isn't my mother. And I said, okay, tell me more. And she says, well, Baba treats me like a princess. Right? He takes care of everything. He does everything for me. And he's so sweet and so kind to me. And I really like that. And I said, and why wouldn't you want that in a mother? I'm feeling a little bit offended here. What's the implication here? And she says, no, she says, but you're the one who teaches me the difference between right and wrong. Right? You're the one who tells me what is appropriate and what's not. Now, I know that sounds like an insane vocabulary word for a 4-year-old. But you had to meet that 4-year-old to know how precocious she really was, that she was even thinking about this. Right? But she really appreciated that I set boundaries for her, that I provided the guardrails for her, which her father wasn't able to do. Right? He provided the soft landing. I provided the guardrails. Two very different approaches with the same intention and eventually the same impact, just with different strategies. So there's like this beautiful thing that when you have different children and you have different parents and they all come together, as long as you're constantly getting open to feedback, and you're sensitive to feedback from the system, from the children, you can't really get it wrong. Right? Because that's, in a functional family, that push and pull, that willingness to accept the two-way conversation, the learning opportunity, seeing all parenting as a learning opportunity to do better is the secret. That's the only thing you need to agree on.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing about parenting is, and I don't know if everyone thinks this way, but at least for me and my husband, we're constantly worried about like, what am I doing wrong? Because although he comes from like strict on school family, his family is very loving and caring to them. My upbringing was a little rougher. So like I said before, like trying to break like the generational pretty much curses that have been going on from my side of the family, like trying to do things different to where we want our kids to be able to come up and ask us questions. We don't want them to be afraid, like, oh, I messed up. I can't go talk to mom about this because it's going to create this bigger issue. So that's where we're trying to come into play. And parenting is scary. And I don't think a lot of people, I don't know, like some of my friends, I want to say I'm probably one of a few in my friend group that has kids, let alone 2 already. And there's some friends that are just like, oh, I can't wait to be a mom. Like, why are you so scared all the time? Like, even pregnancy is just so scary for me. I love it, but I'm always thinking about like, what am I doing wrong? What can I be doing better? And I'm like, that's something that you can't really experience until you're like, you can't understand until you're a parent. Like, it's just, I don't want to mess you up. You're so small.
I have 2 responses here that I'd love to touch on if we have the time. One is, have you ever asked yourself the question, what am I doing right?
Honestly, not that I can really remember.
So that is the greatest opportunity you've denied yourself. And this is not just when it comes to parenting, it comes to all aspects of life. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's my soapbox moment, right? This is something I advocate for all the time. When we receive criticism or when we evaluate ourselves, we always look for what went wrong, right? We always think, what mistakes did we make? How did we mess up? And we internalize all of our failings, and it eats away at our self-esteem. So if you imagine that your self-esteem is like a little ball inside of you, right? Every bit of negative feedback, every bit of negative talk, so self-criticism, eats away at that self-esteem until it becomes riddled with holes. The minute somebody pays you a compliment and says, "Oh, Kristen, you did a great job," or "That was a great paper," right? Or that was a great meeting. Our first response is to deflect that. It's like we're made of Teflon, and the praise comes in, but it never goes inside us. It always gets deflected.
Mhm.
And what ends up happening is that we develop imposter syndrome. We develop, a lack of confidence. We start doubting ourselves. And the thing that I encourage people to do to overcome that is to stop and say, why would that person say I did a good job? Right? And if you can't figure it out for yourself, ask that person.
Mhm.
It's not asking for a pat on the back. It's not self-aggrandization. It's really saying, give me feedback.
Mhm.
Don't just give me feedback when you've got something critical to say. Give me feedback when you've got a compliment. Give me detailed feedback. Because here is what that does. It allows you to understand what it was that set you up for success. And it gives you the opportunity and the ability to repeat it. And what that ends up doing is it helps you develop your self-confidence.
Mhm.
Because now your success is no longer a matter of luck. It's not accidental. You can be deliberate about creating success for yourself because you know what worked in the past, and now you can connect that to what you're going to do in the future.
Mhm.
Right? So that's the first response that I have for you to the opening in that conversation. And the second piece is that you don't really know if you're doing anything right or wrong unless you define what success looks like. And so, as part of my parenting efforts, and when I was working on developing my parenting framework, the Parenting Up framework, I worked with 86 teenagers, right? Not parents, but 86 teenagers. And the reason I worked with 86 teenagers to develop this framework is because I thought to myself, who are the most critical users of parenting? Right? And teenagers, by far, everybody will tell you that the toughest parenting years are the teenage years, right?
Mhm.
So I said, let's just go to the worst case scenario and ask teenagers to help us understand how we can do this better. Right? So go to the customers and get the customer's voice. And it was so amazing because as a result of doing that work, we realized that really there are 5 questions that every parent should be able to answer. And the first question was, how do you define success? How can you say we're doing this right or wrong unless you have a metric to measure it against?
Mhm.
Right? And so, and arriving at that definition of success, now that's where you have the conversation with your partner or with yourself about what are the values I want to transfer to my child? What is my history growing up, being raised as a child into an adult? What worked? What didn't work? Right? What are the practices I want to carry forward? And what are the practices I have to be aware of not falling into? Because that's the other thing. We if we've seen certain behavior repeated over and over, even just observing behavior over and over again, it creates a neural pathway in your brain that can never be broken.
Mhm.
When people talk about breaking habits, that's a fallacy. You cannot break a habit. You can only replace it with a new one. Right? So you have to work on building a new habit. You have to create the alternative path for your brain to start to follow. So, but you've got to be aware of those paths before you can before you can rewrite them or
Mhm.
before you can create alternates. So we work on identifying the history, we work on identifying your values. We work on questions like, how spiritual are you? What's your religious belief? Do you want to pass that on to your children? Right? What is your view of what the world needs today? You were probably brought up in the digital age. I was not. Right? Computers became an everyday object only when I was probably in my mid-20s. So, the kinds of challenges that your children will be facing and the opportunities that they will have are very different from the things you have experience of.
Mhm.
So, what additional skills will they need that you can't even provide them with?
Mhm.
Right. So, it's really thinking about it in a very comprehensive way. So, how do you define success? And then the second piece is why that version of success? Why does it matter to you? And does it matter enough? Because if you aren't entirely vested in that outcome, then you will never do the work. And in which case, I suggest to parents, don't even try. Right. So my husband and I divvied up the things that mattered. So for my husband, getting his children to make good choices about food, good choices about physical well-being, good choices about certain types of lifestyle choices, right, was very important. And so he knew that because that mattered to him so much, he could model those behaviors and talk about them and be deliberate about teaching those to our children. And I didn't have to, I wasn't motivated. So I didn't even try that as hard. I supported him. I never went against what he was trying to do. But my emphasis was on being self-sufficient, being a creative problem solver, being fiscally responsible because I was an accountant. I had to teach them that. Right. So those kinds of things became my priorities because they were really things I felt were very important. And I did the work to transmit those. So, you really have to match this goal with the motivation. And then the third question is, do you model the behavior you want to see? Right? And that's something for teenagers, that's the biggest, most sticky point because often their parents are asking them to do something that they themselves are not doing or behave in ways that they don't have. I mean, a teenager is the biggest integrity detector or the lack of integrity detector that can possibly exist. And so conducting yourself with integrity is essential if you want to transmit something and influence your children. And then the fourth thing is, what's the plan? We say we want to raise children who are creative problem solvers. Well, what's the plan for getting them there? Or I wanted to raise children who were fiscally responsible. I had to have a plan for getting them there. And the plan doesn't start when they're 18 and about to leave for college. The plan starts when they're 5 years old and they have to earn their allowance. Right? And then they have to keep track of it. And then by their 10th birthdays, they're receiving not cash, but debit cards so that they have to learn how to manage plastic, right? So, but you start at 10. So by the time they're 18, they're very responsible. So, that really, you have to have a plan and you have to start today for something you want to accomplish 5 years, 10 years down the line. And the last piece is the piece that I was talking about earlier, which is how can you and I continue to grow together? So not coming to parenting as a unilateral thing. It's a give and take. We receive feedback, we adjust, we adapt, we try something new. We ask them, how do you think we should handle this? Right? Handle this situation, given that these are our concerns or these are the objectives. Right? How should I go about making sure that you're going to, get the grades that you need to get to? Right? How do we do this in a way that works for you and for me? And there were times, Kristen, when, I would fall back on old patterns of behavior. So I came from a home where, academic accomplishment was really heavily emphasized. And if I ever said something, and here I was saying, no, that doesn't matter to me as much as did you make maximum effort? Right? So the outcome wasn't as important as the effort. And that did you demonstrate a learning mindset, a growth mindset, that kind of thing. But if I ever went back on that, what I was saying and didn't walk the talk, my children would call me out. And they'd say, hey, Mom, what about that? And it was understood that if they called me out respectfully, I would respond to it respectfully and say, oh,
Mhm.
yeah, you're right. Help me figure out what I should have said instead. And as a result, we had this give and take, this back and forth, which has allowed us to get so much better at this parenting relationship over time. So with those 5 questions, what's success look like? Why this version of success? How do you model the behavior you want to see? What's the plan? And how will you and I grow together? You've got it made, right? But it has to start with the goal, because you don't know what you're doing right or wrong until you have that.
Mhm.
It's like telling your GPS, take me to where I need to go, but not giving it the
Yeah.
destination to navigate to.
Yeah, so my son, he just started preschool he's been in childcare, but officially preschool started on Monday, and he's always kind of been ahead of where he needs to be.
Yeah.
I mean, full on sentences at like 2.5, and everyone's always like, oh, well, lucky you. I'm like, yeah, until he can voice his opinion. He's like, I don't want this because of this. I'm like, yeah, that's a lot. Especially in class when he's like trying to get used to all his classmates. And
Yeah.
well, we're not friends because she didn't want to hold my hand. I'm like, Presley. But yeah, we're super thankful I used to work at the school that he's currently at, and just like their curriculum and how they give them the opportunity to be creative and just, it's not like the traditional, like I wouldn't say traditional, but the previous schools I used to work at where it's curriculum every part of the day and we have to do things following this schedule. Whereas now being a parent of a child in preschool and not just in that teacher mode all the time, I'm starting to see like how this is really paying off for him. And they have these little like children's choice learning centers where if they're working on an activity and the child's just not getting it, we're going to make sure they get it. But we have these little activity centers where they need a break. Just go off, blow off some steam, play, get your mind off of something. And then we're going to circle back to that later in the day where you're more calm, you can refocus. And I honestly see such a change in him to where he's going to be 4 in January and soon kindergarten happens and we have to put him into public school. And I'm terrified of that because I know what's to come.
Yeah.
And it kind of ties into this next question where, I mean, they start these standardized testing so early. And I honestly feel like that kind of hindered my growth in school, like just the kind of like different situations and how you would view high school to be. Like I thought it was going to be like this exciting time where I'm going to get to hang out with friends and build these relationships. But then my parents were very like, you don't have a choice on whether you want to continue your education after high school. Like you're going to do it. This is what you're going to do. I'm like, okay, well, back then it's like you have to make these certain test scores to even want to think about college. And so all of my high school career kind of just went into focused on my studies, and I had now diagnosed ADHD, but we didn't have it diagnosed back then. So just trying to focus on certain things like math, not my strongest subject, but I had to figure out how to work around it. And that took up all of my, what should have been social time with friends was me trying to just figure out the basics on how to even function in high school, which I mean, great things came about it. I ended up on the National Honor Society. Yes. But now that I look back on it, I'm like, I'm not ready for him to go through that because I know what it's like. And I just want him to focus on like, yes, you have to get the good grades and everything, but also take that time to build relationships with people that may or may not continue after high school, but it kind of sets you up for success in the real world too. Like, you know how to make those connections. So I guess my next, probably last question, I think we're running close on time. Do you think standardized testing are good tools for college readiness, or do you think there's something else that could possibly come about getting that creativity out and just kind of getting schools to see that in a not so stressful way? Because those tests are pretty stressful, especially for the young kids, and it just starting
Well,
earlier.
I would say my answer is a yes and answer. So here's the thing. I am currently in California visiting with my brother-in-law and his family. And in the background, you can probably see there's a few little boys. They're twins, right? They're 9-year-old twins. And they have very different approaches to learning and accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them hates any kind of standardized metric of success because it immediately provokes anxiety for him.
Mm-hmm.
It provokes a lot of stress for him. He works best when the field is wide open and he can explore anywhere and work up to identifying the area that most, the approach that best works for him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, his brother, on the other hand, has this really learns very much by having a standard to aspire to. Okay? He needs somebody to tell him, this is the pathway to success. This is how you get from A to B, B to C, C to D. And if you can get all the way to D, then you're a rock star, right? And then he can put his head down, and he loves that. If you gave him a wide open field, he would not know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have 2 kids who are the same. So here is my answer to your question in a nutshell, which is there is a need for standardized testing because it meets the needs of the children who need that as their inspiration or their motivation or their metric for success, who respond well to that kind of challenge. But then there should also be ways in which students can demonstrate their approach to learning, which is less standardized. Right? So many years ago, Tufts University ran an experiment where students had the option of applying to Tufts and applying either through the standard way where they submit their SAT scores and their ACT scores, all the standardized testing stuff, or else they could take on a challenge, a creative challenge, and I think they could submit a portfolio that demonstrated their capability. And that allowed students of both kinds to apply to the same university, but demonstrating their abilities in very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So if schools could give students the opportunities to do both, then you really are leaving no child behind.
Yeah.
You're really opening yourself up to all the opportunities that you could provide. You're unlocking all of the potential that exists, not just the potential for learning in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a lot of friends that are teachers and just kind of getting their perspective. I mean, growing up, you kind of felt like, oh, the teachers love these test days. This is like, I don't know, it just kind of seemed that way. But then growing up and like having my friends become teachers, they're like, no, we hate these tests because it just stresses out our students. They're stressed out months before the test date because they know it's coming up. And then they're stressed even once the test is done because they're just worried about, how did I do? Did I meet this certain criteria? Like, oh, that's my SAT. Am I not going to get into college now because of my score? Like, I'm not ready to deal with that as a parent.
Well, part of it is building a growth mindset in your child, and that will make them resilient in the face of those kinds of challenges. And I'm sure there are lots of creative ways you can do that. If you're ever interested in thinking about that together, or thinking about that with your husband, you can do that. But yeah, it does create stress, and there is a place for it. In fact, I think one of the reasons why it's been so hard to get creativity into classrooms has been because there hasn't been a test to measure creativity that could be widely applied. I know the Torrance test for creative thinking exists, but it takes a lot of time to evaluate. It can be expensive to administer, and to large bodies of students. So it's not as practical as a test, the standardized testing that a computer can score. Right? But if we could do that, if we could establish a metric that measures creativity, then we would get more resources diverted to it, because you've got to be able to measure something to order to say, are you making a difference with it? And then if we can also show that the creativity helps them in some way, which we know it does, but if it was measurable, wouldn't that be great? But all of that is leading us towards establishing metrics. And yeah, unfortunately, when you're asking for money and resources, there has to be a rationale. So, did that answer your question?
Yes. Well, I just want to thank you so much for your time. I was so excited to meet you, and I'm very, very happy with how things went. So thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, Kristen. I really enjoyed this conversation too. So thank you for initiating it.
Yes, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, thank you again.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.